Joining me now to discuss a very fitful morning, day 12 of the Trump administration, Republican strategist, former chief of staff for Senator Mitch McConnell, Josh Holmes, and Democratic strategist Doug Thornell. Josh, I want to start with you then to Speaker Ryan. There continued to voice support for the ban, noting there were issues, however, with the rollout. What do you make of the remarks?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. If you look at the policy itself and what its intent was to achieve, it's not a particularly politically dangerous position to suggest that you have extra vetting for individuals traveling in from any of the 7 countries identified by the Obama administration as having a high propensity for terrorism. The problem here is the rollout. And what we've seen is this is spiraling out of control with some misunderstandings about who it applies to and where and whether green card holders are affected. And all of that has sort of contributed to this uncertainty that I suspect both Speaker Ryan and soon Secretary Kelly will address.
Josh, though, as we see the rollout, and we heard the speaker refer to perhaps the rhetoric as well, wasn't the rollout for something like this acutely important, considering what we have now heard from members of the intelligence community, the national security community, diplomats, in fact, in many Muslim majority nations, that this is essentially going to be used as a recruiting tool for ISIS?
Well, I think you hear that argument about just about any foreign policy decision America makes, that somebody suggests that it's some kind of a impetus behind future terror attacks. Look, I think we know who the enemy is, and I think we're pretty clear about what they're trying to do to America and our allies. I think the greater question here is the learning curve that any new administration has when they get the reins of power, which is understanding all the levers that are at their disposal and fully vetting all of these things before they actually become part of the ball game. And that is the piece that they clearly have to clean up. And it's the piece that I imagine Secretary Kelly and Speaker Ryan and the rest of them are talking about today.
Vetting would, of course, mean in part perhaps relying on his various cabinet picks already in place. Doug, we learned, in fact, in just the last hour, we will be hearing from Secretary Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, 12 Eastern, about the implementation of this ban. What do you hope to hear from the Secretary?
Well, look, there was a lot of confusion and chaos in terms of how this was executed. I agree with Josh on that. I'm not entirely sure if the president does know exactly who the enemy is. When you're detaining translators and people with green cards, those aren't who we're trying to fight, right? We're trying to fight terrorists. And execution of executive orders are very important, and you should be thinking through all of those various steps before you actually sign one. And I'm not entirely clear that he actually vetted this with anyone. I'm not sure if, like Josh's old boss, Mitch McConnell, had an opportunity to weigh in, or if other people, it seems as though General Mattis found out about this very late. And so, it seems like it was just kind of rushed. That's why you had the acting attorney general last night weigh in and say that she thought it was illegal, and she ended up losing her job for speaking her mind. But I think, look, what Secretary Kelly can talk about today is moving forward. How is this going to be implemented? How is this going to be executed? There's a lot of fear out there for a lot of folks coming into the country and in the country, and I think, he needs to dispel of that fear and make people feel comfortable and really clearly explain the executive order, because it hasn't been clearly explained, obviously, and I think it's wrong. But if the administration is going to try to get on the right side of this, they're going to have to try to calm a lot of nerves.
You mentioned the learning curve, Josh. The AP reporting that Secretary Kelly, Secretary Mattis, the Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson, all were not aware of this. We just heard the speaker say that he learned of it, in fact, as it was being rolled out as well. And we just heard Doug mention the other major turn of events in the last 24 hours. The acting attorney general, Sally Yates, fired for essentially doing that which she promised Jeff Sessions she would do in her 2015 hearing, stand up to the president when she felt she needed to. The learning curve, if nothing else, what does it suggest to you about the power base in this administration?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what it says about the power base. What I do know is for any administration, and the same was true of the Obama administration and to a certain extent the beginning of the Bush administration, is that there's a huge transition between the campaign and implementing the policies that you talk about during the course of a campaign and actually hitting the ground running when you're in the White House, in the Oval Office. And any administration wants to start right away by implementing their campaign promises. What you find out along the way is it's more difficult than it is during the campaign to actually put those things into motion. And checking the boxes like the ones that you just suggested with both Mattis and Kelly, in addition to congressional leaders, is an important step in the process. My guess is that they've probably learned that from this situation. It is an unavoidable part of the puzzle that everybody needs to understand.
Doug, meanwhile, we did also hear, as it regarded State Department officials dissenting with the travel ban yesterday, from Press Secretary Sean Spicer. He essentially said, like it or leave it. It would seem increasingly that there's an element in this administration that suggests that dissent equals betrayal. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that would be unfortunate. I think one of the things that I appreciated about President Obama's cabinet is that you had people in there that, he wasn't necessarily, they weren't like carrying his water on everything. You had Secretary Clinton, you had Bill Gates as his defense secretary, you had Ray LaHood, a Republican. I think having people in your cabinet and in parts of your government who will stand up to you and say, look, I think this is a bad idea, even in your administration, is helpful. I think that, Josh and I have both worked on the Hill for a long time, and, I think it was always helpful to our bosses to have someone say, look, I think you're wrong about this, right? And at least let's think more about it. And I think that for something this important, and this was a major policy change, it wasn't done through Congress. I think that it was, I think the administration owed it to go through all of the different mechanizations to make sure that when it was rolled out properly. And they didn't do that, and they're paying for it now. And I think that it ends up, it'll end up hurting Trump in the long term in terms of showing competency. And I think that's what people are starting to question as far as this administration goes.
Josh, meanwhile, as we are in fact talking right now, the debate over the nomination of Senator Sessions does continue. We can note that Senators Leahy and Feinstein have both said they would oppose his nomination, took the opportunity to blast the president for the firing of Sally Yates as well. What have you made of the proceedings thus far?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the funny things about this whole transgression. Doug was talking about having folks that have the power to disagree with the president. I don't think anybody would suggest that General Mattis is a lapdog for Donald Trump, nor would they suggest that about General Kelly, and nor would they suggest that about Attorney General nominee Jeff Sessions, but they're all being opposed by Democrats in the Senate regardless of their take. And so now you've got holdover Democratic appointees from the Obama administration that are essentially using the opportunity to grandstand before the press to make a big deal out of implementations that Donald Trump and his administration are trying to make. I think if everybody wants to get off on the right foot here, and granted there have been mistakes in the last 10 days, but going forward, give the man his staff, make sure that these people are there to implement the policies correctly, and we can all make of the policy what we will going forward.
What do you see as the mistakes he's made thus far, Josh?
Well, I think very clearly the rollout of this executive order is an example of something that wasn't fully baked. Now, the policy in and of itself, I've said this for a long time, the policy in and of itself, if you figure out the green card holders piece of this, if you allow our armed forces to have a discussion about who has helped us in the course of fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and you put that on the floor of the United States Senate or the House of Representatives, it would pass overwhelmingly. And those who didn't vote for it would be in political peril. So this is not a very controversial policy if implemented correctly.
Yeah, but I think that, look, I don't necessarily disagree with Josh on the political peril some might face voting against it, but I do think that that's not what happened. What happened is that this was packaged in a very kind of ideological, I think, way in which folks, our friends, and even our enemies overseas interpreted it as the administration trying to wage a war on Islam. And that's how I think a lot of people, that's what we're hearing from folks, from our allies overseas, from Muslim countries, that it was interpreted that way. And I think that was a messaging problem by the administration. I also think that when you single out 7 countries and try to ban refugees, many of them who are escaping those terrorists that we're fighting and trying to come over here so that they can be part of our country, this is something that America has always stood for. I think that's just the wrong message you want to send to our allies and folks who are in the middle of the fight in a lot of these dangerous places across the world that, look, we stand with you.
I think the point that we're losing here with these 7 countries is that these are identified by the Obama administration as hotbeds for terrorism, right? And we're not just singling out countries based on the majority of faith that live within the confines of their borders. I mean, these are countries that we have our intelligence agencies, the Department of State, the Pentagon, a whole host of Department of National Intelligence have concluded pose risks to our country. And so I think if you look at that on its whole, the policy makes sense if implemented correctly. And again, I hope General Kelly and others will put a fine point on that, because there's no question it didn't roll out the way it was intended.
Well, there are certainly other countries that certainly fit the bill then for what you would suggest, Josh, this is attempting to do. Would you be in favor of seeing this list expand?
You know what I'd be in favor of? What I'd be in favor of is having some specificity about what it is that we're looking for, and not allowing the press or this administration's critics to frame it as some kind of a quote-unquote Muslim ban or even a quote-unquote travel ban. What's interesting about this is it's a heightened level of scrutiny. Nowhere in it does it say ban. Yet that's the sort of the shorthand of what we're talking about here. So I think what I'd like is to have them sharpen up their pencils and get to a point where everybody understands exactly what it is that they're trying to implement, so we can stop shorthanding and concluding on our own what they mean.
The idea of the religious test has been discussed, but Josh, it does bear mentioning that Rudy Giuliani, one of the staunchest surrogates for the president, himself confirmed that then candidate Donald Trump asked him to write a Muslim ban that could also be legal.
Yeah, I must have missed where Rudy Giuliani was sworn in as a part of this administration. I don't think that happened. But either way, I mean, look, we know what Donald Trump said in the course of the campaign. He's since walked a lot of that back. The point is, what is this, right? Is this a quote-unquote Muslim ban? The answer is absolutely not. I can't imagine that there'd be a single member on the Hill, Republican or Democrat, that would allow for something like that without rigorous hearings and probably a lot of dissent. What this is an opportunity to try to safeguard our nation's entry ports across the country. And I think from that standpoint, and a policy perspective, it actually merits worthy consideration.
I would just say that the screening system that's already in place is pretty tough. And if we go back to September 11th, 2001, as far as I know, none of the people on this list none of the people who attacked our country were actually from any of these countries on this list. And Rudy Giuliani is a part of the administration. My understanding is he's a chief cyber security advisor to the administration. So, I do think he carries weight. But look, I agree with Josh in this respect in terms of, look, this country needs specificity. They need to understand what this is, what this isn't. And the Trump administration has done a poor job of communicating that. And hopefully Secretary Kelly addresses that today, and the administration can kind of, as Josh said, put a little more fine-tuning into what this is, and so that people aren't scared. I mean, a lot of people are just scared right now about what this means. If they're coming into this country, or if they have relatives overseas and they're supposed to come back, I think it's a very kind of unnerving moment, and the administration's kind of allowed that to happen.
I could and would, in fact, discuss this with the two of you all day, but I think we're going to leave it there. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there at that moment of agreement. Josh Holmes and Doug Thornell, very much appreciate the insights and the time, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.